the beginning of meetings like this, we're sort of like, oh, what's going to happen? And maybe we're feeling a little bit nervous. But actually, the story is incredibly encouraging. And that's what happened last time in July. We had a healing service, and we didn't have a clue what would happen or how things would go. And we had three groups of people, three people here, three people halfway back, and three people out in the porch. And we'll do that again today. You'll be able to go to whichever group you want to go to, and just share as much or little as you'd like to. And then those three people will pray with you into that situation. And each group is also going to have some oil. So I'll explain a little bit about this in a moment. But we do believe that, oil has been used all through the history of humanity. God seems to use oil to anoint us, to bless us, to particularly bring something of his blessing upon us. And that's why we do it. There's nothing magic about the oil. It's when we step out and we want God to use it that it suddenly becomes something that is used by God. So today's story is a story of a man with leprosy who was healed by Jesus, and then he couldn't stop telling everyone. It's a good story. I won't stop speaking now because I want to unpack it, but that's pretty much it. And I felt God put this story on my heart, and I would love to hear if at the end of this you feel, God has maybe spoken to you through this, because there's a particular reason why this story, out of all the things that Jesus, all the healing stories of Jesus, why this story was kind of on my heart, and it would be just interesting to know if that resonates with you. But let's first consider this man with leprosy. They say it's easy to focus on the negative, so I thought, well, let's start where it's easy, on the negative. So let's focus on the leprosy. So this man had leprosy. Now, we don't know what leprosy exactly means. It could have meant some sort of skin disease. Obviously, there's still people who suffer with leprosy, not necessarily here, but in India and places of Africa. But also, it could be any sort of skin-related thing, and it is often contagious or not known if it was contagious, and therefore it was something that was very serious. Now, over 1,000 years before this story happened, a man called Moses had, in a book called Leviticus, had written what you had to do if you had leprosy. And it's really not very encouraging. Firstly, you had to let your clothes be all torn and ragged. Secondly, you had to let your hair out and kind of go wild. Thirdly, they often wore bandages all around them. But the third thing they had to do was to shout out the words unclean. Unclean. Really, with your own mouth, you had to declare to people that you were unclean. And you were supposed to cover your upper lip. And I think what that means is a bit like this, so that if there's airborne diseases, it doesn't go to the other person when you're shouting, unclean, unclean. So that was a sort of situation. So you've already got these sores and these terrible lesions on your skin, which in some cases affected the nerve endings, and then you couldn't feel in the end of your fingers and in the end of your toes, and any extremities, you begin to lose the feeling. And of course, without touch, you have all sorts of problems. You can you pick up a live coal and not even realize it's hot. You can do all sorts of terrible things. But on top of that, you had to look ragged and rough, and you had to shout, unclean, unclean. Now, interestingly, hundreds of years after this, they did allow these people, these lepers, into the synagogue, but they had to be behind a screen, so that again nothing could kind of pass and contaminate the worshippers. So there was lots of levels of protection and stuff. In this society, but in many societies, where there's an illness, there can often be a sense of shame or a sense of distancing. I think we're better in this culture to some degree. But I remember going out to the Maasai people. I grew up in Kenya, and I took a team of men out there one time to help my dad with, he was designing off-road wheelchairs for these little Maasai children. The Maasai women were often married at 13 or 14 years of age, and their firstborn child would often have cerebral palsy or different illnesses for being born so young. And so we went out in the Land Rover to this, what they call a boma, which is a little hut, mud hut. There's a kind of like the Maasai people are semi-nomadic, which means they sometimes have to move to follow their cows, where the cows go to where there's fine grass. So there would be this boma, And this boma had no windows in it. It's just a thatched roof and mud kind of walls. And Makolo was the physiotherapist. He took us there. And he said, come. And when we got to this boma, there was nobody there. It was silent because they had all gone to follow their herds, for grass that day. But he said, there'll be a little girl in there. And I said, no, there can't be. It's silent. Everybody's abandoned the place. But he opened the door, because it's kind of like a wooden rickety door that we opened. We went into this pitch dark boma. And there was this whimpering little 12-year-old girl. And she's left there all day in the dark because she can't walk anymore. Her limbs can't work because they're not being... There's no physio, there's no treatment for them. And so we were bringing this wheelchair that could basically take this little girl anywhere over the rough. There's no paths, there's no roads, it's just thorns and rocks and stuff. So the wheelchairs have to be very adaptable to this. And this little girl, you see, for the Maasai people, she's a problem for them because she's not very nomadic. She struggles to follow. She struggles to be a contribution. She's basically a burden in their society. And it's a tragic, but it's a very real way of capturing the fact that when we get an illness, when we get a disability, and sometimes that's mental health or lack of, sometimes it's physical, it sometimes carries with it this sense of not knowing who we are or what we're doing in society anymore. It sometimes carries this burden on people that we love. I mean, fortunately, we don't have to shout this, leper, leper, unclean, unclean. But there is all that mixed in with it, isn't it? It's not normally just as simple as putting a plaster over something. It normally begins to go deeper into who we are. And I wonder if that's maybe why we're looking at this particular story. So, what does the man do? Well, the man comes up to Jesus. Remember, he's in rags. He uncut and unkempt hair, probably bandaged, declaring himself unclean. He comes up to Jesus, which he probably shouldn't really have done or been able to do, but who's going to touch him to stop him? So he comes up to Jesus and he falls at Jesus' feet, as though his body intuitively knows that he's coming before somebody who is far, far greater than him. And I don't know if his knees buckled or what, but he just comes and he begs at Jesus' feet. Now, here's what I've realized, and it's taken me a long time in life to realize this. In fact, only in the last few years did I realize this. That any time we're desperate for God to do something in our lives, right? Any time we've got to the place where we can't seem to help ourselves, and even the medical people can't seem to help us, or nobody we know seems to be able to help us, at that moment, sometimes we look beyond ourselves. And I'm beginning to realize that this is what I will call holy ground. It's one of those rare moments in the lives of us human beings when we are perhaps forced, almost, pressed into realizing that we need the transcendent. We need somebody who is far above and beyond us to reach down and do something that we can't do and nobody can seem to do for us. Because if you're anything like me, you work super hard at fixing your own problems, which is not a bad thing, but it can be a pride thing, and it can be this sort of, I can do it myself. I'm a self-made man. I'm a self-made person. Thank you very much. For me, I personally really only learnt to be fully dependent on God in the last few years as my marriage began to break up. 3 years of therapy didn't seem to help it. Even believing in a God who could raise the dead didn't seem to help it. Because at the end of the day, God never commands human beings. He only invites us. And therefore, I didn't know how to fix this marriage. And finally, I came to the place where I realized I can't fix it. And I felt probably a little bit like that leper. It doesn't just affect you on the outside, it affects you on the inside. You feel like things are unraveling. You feel like you've messed up and that something is wrong with you. And I felt like this, and it was really only my phone, actually. Funny enough, my phone. Last thing at night, I would go to switch it on to airplane mode. And when I did, I had this setting where YouVersion, which is like the Bible it's an app, a Bible on the phone. It sends you a verse a day. And YouVersion, I'd literally just switch the phone to go to off, and I'd see these verses come up on my screen. And time and again, it was like God was just saying, John Mark, I'm trying to reach you. I'm trying to reach out to you. Will you let me in? So when we're in this place where we need somebody greater than we know, let's call it a holy place. Please don't feel a sense of shame. This might be the most valuable moment in your life. I'm really serious. Because the moment we let God touch whatever it is that can't be fixed in our life, we let God be God of that little bit of our life that can't be fixed. Does that make sense? The moment we let God be God of that little bit, we're actually lining up where God is for once, perhaps, or he's God again in our lives. Does that make sense? For me, it's not, I wasn't there because I wanted to be there. I liked leading a church. I liked having everything lined up. I liked helping other people. I didn't like being the one who had to be helped. It was all wrong. I'm the one who's supposed to have my life together so that I can help other people. And yet God is saying, John Mark, your life is not together. And you know what? I'm trying to reach you. Never mind what you can do for others. I'm trying to reach you. And it was life-giving for me. Really. It was a holy, holy moment. Well, many moments, to be honest. So this man comes up to Jesus and he falls at his feet and says, Lord, you can make me clean if you're willing. Now, there's the language that I just want to pause on for a second. Do you see how the leprosy has impacted not just his body, but his sense of who he is? He doesn't doubt that Jesus can heal him. What he doubts is, why would Jesus want to touch him? Because he's been shouting to society, keep away from me, I'm unclean. Why would God want to have anything to do with me? Does that make sense? That's when the illness, the disease, the disability has seeped into how we see ourselves. And that's where we need a touch from God. I know you can heal me, but I don't know if you're willing to heal me. Am I worth healing? Now let's go from the bad news to the good news. I'm now going to focus not on the leper, but on Jesus. Why Jesus? Because I am utterly convinced that Jesus is uniquely God, the Son of God, taken on human flesh. So every time that I think in my mind, oh, what would God do about that? What would God think about that? Or other people say to me, I would believe in God, but I can't see him. Jesus is him. Jesus is the person of God. Of the three persons of God, Jesus is the one who took on human flesh and was a human being 2,000 years ago, and actually still is, but that's another whole story. So Jesus is there, and how Jesus responds to the leper is how God will respond to us. How do I know that? Because he's the same one. This is Jesus God taking on flesh, right? So you might say, well, how do I know God? Well, have a look and have a listen. Let's see what Jesus does. So the man throws himself, he says, you can heal me if you are willing. And what does Jesus do? This is what I love about this. We don't often hear of Jesus necessarily physically doing anything. He often just speaks and people's eyes are open or different things happen. But what does he do? He literally reaches out and he touches the leper. Now just remember, this they believed was contagious. I mean, it took 2,000 years for Lady Diana to touch a leper. Remember that? She touched a leper and the reverberations went through the world. Because it's so easy to believe that when you have something wrong with you on the outside, there's something wrong with you. And if somebody touches you, they will get that wrong onto them. With Jesus, it's the opposite way around. When Jesus touched this man, rather than getting contaminated by this illness, he actually made the man whole. And here's what he says. I love the fact that Jesus listened to him, because this is what Jesus says. He says, I am willing. Be clean. Jesus spoke to the exact fears that the man had. You know, this man believed Jesus could heal him. What he didn't believe was whether Jesus would want to, because nobody else would touch him. Jesus said, I am willing. Be clean. And I'm coming to an end soon, but I just want to say a couple things. The Bible tells us that immediately the leprosy left him. Now, you and I would probably use the words, immediately he got better. But I love the way it says the leprosy left him. As though the leprosy was something that was on him, but it wasn't supposed to be part of him. It wasn't supposed to define him. It wasn't supposed to make him into a leper. Jesus could say to him, be clean, and the leprosy left him. That's the power of God. That he can get rid of that which isn't ever meant to be part of you. He can speak that life into you. And you can be freed from that which was never meant to be part of you, but which has been hanging on you. We call it baggage. And it's very, very powerful. When you see or sense yourself reacting in a way that's irrational and you think, where did that come? That's often baggage. And it doesn't, and it shouldn't define us. And with Jesus, it doesn't. He says, be clean, and the leprosy left him. And that's what we're inviting to see Jesus do the same thing in our lives, in the lives of others. Now, how Jesus heals is, you can't just put a formula onto this. Let me just give you one illustration. Margaret was a lady that was in the church that I used to lead. She was in a wheelchair. The reason she was in a wheelchair was the day she was moving house from Devon to move up to Longwell Green, she suddenly remembered when the movers were there that she had forgotten about all the stuff in her loft. And she panicked, and in that same day, she literally cleared, this is at the age of 65, she cleared the whole loft into those trucks because she just thought, oh! A month later, she suffered a stroke. She thinks it's because of that. Her body couldn't cope with that level of stress. She suffered a stroke. She lost the use of her legs. Bizarrely, her accent turned German. Now, don't take that. That's got nothing to do with being German. I asked her, how come you have a German accent? And she said, I don't know, the stroke affected that. And she had a bit of a German accent, which is remarkable. Anyway, so she's in this wheelchair. And we used to go have a prayer meeting in her house, and different carers would come. And she was a light and a wonderful overflow of the love of Jesus to all different people that came into her place. But she always wanted to be healed and to get out of that wheelchair. And I said to her, you will do. But I think you'll only do it when you get a new body. She wanted to get out of the wheelchair there and then. But if she had done, we wouldn't have come to her house to pray. No carers would have come to her house to find out about Jesus. And she would have been wandering around like the rest of us. And so maybe that's why God didn't have a vision to heal her in her old body. But now she's gone to be with Jesus. She has a resurrection body. She's not in a wheelchair anymore. She's probably not even her older age anymore with all that old age brings. She's her true self now. I only say that God's healing that he wants to bring to us could be multi-layered. It might be in your heart. It might be in how you see yourself, no longer defining yourself as a leper that's unclean. It might be physical, literally giving you a physical impact. We had all of those last time. But also the ultimate healing that we get is when we get a new body. Because even if we're healed today, at some point our bodies will give up. And what we really want is a God who lives in us, who fills us, who overflows us, so that even though one day our body gives up, we ultimately have life that never ends. Let me just say one more thing, and then, there's a PowerPoint, by the way. Sorry, I forgot to ask you, Alan. You've not missed anything, because you're not supposed to. There's only this slide and the final one, which we'll just bring up in a second, but not yet. There's one last little bit funny thing about this story. Jesus says to the man, once he's healed, don't say anything, go to the priest, show yourself to the priest. The priest will check that you're all clean. The priest will then declare you clean in the society. And the priest will also have to try to figure out how this happened. And that will be a testimony to the priest. Sadly, the man didn't do that. Jesus was very firm. He said, make sure you do not go anywhere but go to the priest. But he didn't. He went and told everybody. I guess he was excited. But it also meant that Jesus could no longer walk publicly because he was now mobbed by people who wanted to be healed. And I think there is something here for us. That when God touches us, try to listen to what God is asking you to do. Because he has a vision for your life more than just healing you of leprosy. Okay. So thank you, Alan. Let's just have the 5. I'll just go through in case you've thought, what is it? 5 points? I can't believe he's made 5 points. Let's listen. These are the 5. The first one is this. Illness can damage how we see ourselves. And it's easy to think that we are bad because we are ill. Jesus is going to free us and wants to free us from that. The second one, our desperate need for God's help can be holy ground. Don't see it as a thing of shame or I'm so sorry. No. You are potentially on holy ground. When you need somebody who can't just, no human being can fix you, you're reaching out to the transcendent, the ultimate one, the Almighty. That is holy ground. Jesus literally wants to reach out and touch you. And that's partly why we have oil. And if you're happy for this, then the different group, whatever group you go to, will invite or ask if you're happy with this. They will literally put some of this oil on their finger and put it on your head, or put it maybe, on your shoulder or something like that, but probably on your head. But it's literally to symbolize the touch, not of the person, but of God. Jesus wants to touch us. And as God's people, we do it on his behalf. But may you know that this is God touching you, not just a hand. Fourthly, Jesus can cleanse you and make you right. The leprosy left him because actually it had no part in him. God never made us to be suffering in this way. And if you're suffering, it wasn't from God. But if you're suffering and you let God touch you, then God can use that. And it can be the release into a new sense of life. And lastly, join us in trying to follow Jesus. Let's let Jesus lead us. Yeah. Yes, we come to him because we need healing. But his vision is that actually we find life. Let's just come before this God. Maybe if you want to just close your eyes. What's going to happen is that I'm going to pray in a moment, and then we're just going to have some background music. And I would invite all of us to not leave yet, not go for that. There will be coffees and teas down in the hall behind me, but not to go there yet. If you can, stay in that place where you are praying, either for yourself or for those who are being prayed for. Let's contribute to what God is trying to do in and through us today. So in a moment, I'm going to pray. And then after the music starts and after we have some 3 groups, there's going to be a group here at the front, a group at the back, and a group in the porch. Go to any group that you feel you want to go to. Doesn't matter. And share as much or little as you want to with them. And the only other thing I'd say is, please don't, if somebody's being prayed for and you're waiting to be prayed for, please stay seated or stay further away so that there's just that sense of privacy for whoever's talking or sharing. And let's see what God wants to do, how he wants to touch us.